If everything goes according to plan, real-life NASCAR racing will be back in less than 3 weeks. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove. Very full show today. There's a lot of information to cover and a lot of things to react to in today's episode. But before I get too far into it, I do want to shout out that the Icebox Pickup Throwdown will be returning tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can watch it live right here on this channel. I'll be a part of the broadcast team once again. For those of you who missed the first race in the series last week, the replay is still available to watch right here on my channel. But it's basically the Truck Series, but iRacing. Many of your favorite Truck Series competitors, as well as some Xfinity Cup and a few wildcard drivers, are participating in this series for real cash prizes. Tomorrow is the Rich Marr Florist 100 at the virtual Kansas Speedway. Big thanks, of course, to Icebox for sponsoring the series, Jordan Anderson for helping put things together, as well as AE Engine and Podium Esports for helping broadcast this. Really great show last week. We're hoping to put on an even better one here tomorrow night, so stay tuned for that. I'm excited for it. Hope you guys are too. I also have another very exciting video in the works that hopefully will be up later this week, completely unrelated to iRacing, that I'm very excited for, and I think you all will be as well. But with that all being said, with that all being teased right there, we've got a lot to discuss in today's episode. Before I get to the new released revised schedule for the resumption of the 2020 NASCAR season, we have to talk one more time about Matt Kenseth and Ryan Newman. If you missed it, Matt Kenseth is coming out of retirement. He'll be driving the 42 car for Chip Ganassi Racing once the season resumes, and yesterday, Matt Kenseth and Ryan Newman were both granted playoff waivers by NASCAR. Ryan Newman, of course, missed 3 races due to an injury he sustained at the end of this year's Daytona 500. Not shocking that NASCAR would grant him a playoff waiver. Typically, they do grant waivers to drivers who have to miss some races due to injury. Usually, they grant you a waiver in that case. But Matt Kenseth is the more interesting scenario. Matt Kenseth was not injured. The only reason he didn't race these first 4 races of the season is because, well, he didn't have a ride. Nobody signed him. So in a lot of ways, this does break precedent for NASCAR that they're granting Matt Kenseth a playoff waiver. Now, what this means by granting these 2 drivers playoff waivers just means that if they win a race and are in the top 30 in driver points by the end of the regular season, they'll be locked into the playoffs. Of course, they can still try to point their way in. Ryan Newman, maybe that's still possible because he did get a lot of points from that one race at Daytona. If he's able to just drive his way up into the top 16 on points and there's not 16 different winners, great, he's in the playoffs no matter what. But more than likely, at least in Matt Kenseth's case, he's going to have to win one of the regular season races remaining and also make sure he's in the top 30 in driver owner points. I think that's not an issue at all. He will definitely be in the top 30 in driver points. Winning that race here, he's got, I guess, 22 more races to do it. Might be a little bit more difficult because, like I've said before, I think it's going to take him at least a few weeks to kind of get the feel back under him. But this does kind of break precedent. I mean, the rule states that in order to compete for the championship, you must race in every single race on the schedule. Now, many people have pointed out that this rule is really only in place to prevent drivers from like winning the first race of the season and then taking a couple weeks off. It's mainly put in place to prevent something like that from happening, which I think is smart, but it's not really put in place to prevent guys like Matt Kenseth or Ryan Newman from contending for championships. Newman, of course, extenuating circumstance, injury forced him out of the car, not his own fault. Matt Kenseth's case, a little bit different. This is a new one. This is not one that we've seen NASCAR typically grant a waiver for in the past, but it also hasn't come up very much in the past. But what it sounds like to me is NASCAR is granting Matt Kenseth the waiver, not as much for Matt Kenseth's sake, more so for Chip Ganassi and their sponsors' sake. Credit One Bank, McDonald's, Advent Health, Clover, they all signed on this year, spending a lot of money on that 42 car because they assumed Kyle Larson would be able to run for the championship. With Larson's debacle and now his termination from NASCAR for the time being, those sponsors really, I'm sure, were afraid they're not going to get their money's worth. NASCAR granting Matt Kenseth this waiver still gives McDonald's and Advent Health and Credit One Bank something to support, something to follow, something to kind of have a rooted interest in throughout the regular season. There is still a prize at the end of the line here. They're not just out there logging laps, so to speak. So I think that's really what this comes down to. Believe me, I don't think NASCAR is going out of their way to do Matt Kenseth any favors. They never have in the past. I think this is more a favor to Chip Ganassi Racing and his sponsors. Still, sets an interesting precedent going forward. Not a situation that I'm sure will come up very often, but when it does now, people are going to look to this Matt Kenseth example, and there's going to be a lot of drivers in the future that maybe wouldn't typically be thought of as playoff eligible who might get the waiver in the future. It is what it is. If you make it into the top 16 points or you get into the top 30 and win a race, per the rulebook, I don't see why you shouldn't be eligible for the playoffs or for the championship, but that doesn't mean Matt Kenseth is definitely making the playoffs. I think he has ways to go. He's going to have to win probably in this regular season, and that's easier said than done. All right, but now I want to spend the vast majority of this episode going over information regarding NASCAR's new 2020 schedule, at least part of it. They have not revealed a full 2020 revised schedule, but but they have now revealed the first 8 or so Cup Series races, and we now have reports that maybe the first couple Xfinity and even truck races have been revealed as well. Now this revised schedule, which NASCAR reportedly sent all the race teams here in the last few days, is very similar to the one I mentioned briefly in yesterday's video, but today I'm going to talk about it in a lot more detail. So to get everyone up to speed, to just start out here, let me list out for you guys NASCAR's revised 2020 restart schedule. If all things go according to plan, the Cup Series will return May 17th at Darlington for a 400-mile race. Then 3 days later on Wednesday, May 20th, Darlington again for a 310-mile Cup race. Then on May 24th, the Coke 600 in Charlotte Motor Speedway will go off as per usual. Then May 27th, they'll have another race at Charlotte, a midweek race, 300 miles. Then we have May 31st, Martinsville, June 3rd, Bristol, June 7th, Atlanta, and June 14th, Homestead. That's 8 Cup Series races in less than a month. Pretty crazy. A lot of midweek races in there. Now you'll notice on that list, only the first 4 races have scheduled distances alongside them. The races like Bristol, Martinsville, Atlanta, Homestead do not currently have distances scheduled. I think NASCAR is going to want to wait and see how Charlotte and Darlington go before they commit to either shortening or keeping those distances for those other races the same. Now looking at that schedule again, you'll notice that 7 out of those 8 tracks are within about 3.5–4 hours driving distance from Charlotte, North Carolina. It had already been reported earlier in the week that NASCAR would prefer to restart the season at tracks fairly close to Charlotte Motor Speedway, within driving distance of the headquarters where pretty much every race team is located. Another thing you'll notice there is that Martinsville, which is in the state of Virginia, is scheduled for May 31st. Now, right now, Virginia has a stay-at-home order still in effect until the first week of June. Perhaps NASCAR believes they'll be able to get an exemption to run that race without fans. That is unclear at the moment. And of course that does go without saying, but I should go ahead and mention it anyways. All of these races that are scheduled there would be run without fans in attendance. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but a couple of other notable observations. No Texas. The governor of Texas and Eddie Gossage, the president of Texas Motor Speedway, have both expressed interest in getting one of their Texas Motor Speedway races run fairly soon. There was hope that they would run early in June, possibly a doubleheader with IndyCar. Texas is not listed on this newly revised schedule, so not sure if that means Texas will lose a date or if they're still hoping to make up the March Texas date that was postponed at a later time. But that is interesting that Texas Motor Speedway is not listed. Of course, Texas Motor Speedway is like a 15-hour drive from Charlotte, North Carolina, so it doesn't really fit into NASCAR's game plan here, but it is what it is. Surprised that Texas wasn't on there. Another reason NASCAR is opting to start with both Darlington and Charlotte, which are technically both intermediate tracks, before the suspension began, before this hiatus began, most every Cup Series team already had at least a couple intermediate cars prepared. Of course, this year NASCAR is running a slightly different aero package at intermediate versus short tracks. Most of the teams already had some intermediate cars prepared, so this is going to make getting ready to return to racing a bit easier for a lot of teams, especially now that most teams are able to go back to the race shop now and work as long as they're maintaining proper social distancing guidelines. It still puts less strain on the teams to be prepared for the restart of the season, since the first few races back are all intermediate tracks. And one final initial observation here, looking at this schedule, but you see 2 Darlingtons back-to-back, then 2 Charlottes back-to-back. Those 2 Darlington races, and likely the 300-mile Charlotte race, are likely going to replace other races on the schedule. Not sure what track specifically those races will replace, but let me put it this way. I believe the Southern 500, that's supposed to happen in September, is still expected to be run in September. So in theory, this means we could have 3 Darlington races in 2020. But these first 2 that they're looking at restarting the season with would likely replace other dates on the schedule. It's an ISC-owned track, which is technically owned by NASCAR, so my thought would be that they would replace other ISC tracks' dates. Which one specifically remains to be seen, but that's what I would expect to happen. And same thing for Charlotte. With that one extra Charlotte race after the Coke 600, I would assume, since that's an SMI-owned track, they would replace another SMI date with that. I mentioned this a few videos ago, but this isn't going to be perfectly fair for every racetrack. There will be some racetracks this year that may not get a NASCAR race at all. The hope is just that their parent company brings in enough revenue from running these other races that they're able to distribute the revenue and keep all of their tracks in business. I mean, that's just what we have to hope for. I don't think ISC or SMI are going to want to put any of their racetracks out of business. It's just maybe unfair for fans in certain regions or fans of certain racetracks. Some tracks may not get run this year or may lose one of their dates. But hey, we might get 3 Darlingtons. That'll be something. We might get a couple extra Charlottes here. It'll still be interesting. It's going to be a wild and rocky restart to the season for sure. Everyone's just going to kind of have to hold on to their seats. Anyway, I told you guys there's going to be a lot of information in this video. Per reports, we have to talk about some other details regarding these first 8 Cup Series races back. Then we'll look at Truck and Xfinity stuff as well, because some details might be emerging on those series finally. The first thing to point out is that all of those races, minus the Coke 600, will be single-day shows, which means likely no practice or qualifying. They'll just show up, make some adjustments, and the race will go green, which for drivers like Matt Kenseth, who hasn't been on a race car in a year and a half, might be tough getting going at first. Of course, no fans will be in attendance. Only essential crew members and broadcast media members will be permitted, at least at first. Obviously, this is all subject to change given how those first few races go. I saw some conflicting reports about live pit stops. AutoWeek initially reported that live pit stops would go away temporarily, but then later The Athletic reported that NASCAR had seemingly changed their minds and live pit stops will remain. They might be slightly varied. We may not have 6 guys going over the wall each time for a pit stop per team. Might be slightly edited to some extent, but at least as of now, NASCAR appears to be planning to stick with traditional live pit stops during those first 8 races. Then, of course, team members are required to wear masks, maintain social distancing guidelines, and have their temperature checked every time they enter and leave the track. Obviously, just checking temperatures, just wearing a mask, just maintaining social distancing is not guarantee that this is going to be a 100% safe and secure environment, but it does add extra layers of protection for sure. I think NASCAR truly believes that by limiting the number of people at the racetrack to just those couple hundred essential crew members and everything, they can control any potential spread of the virus much easier than if obviously they open it up to 70,000 fans or more media members, more crew guys, everyone. And by doing single day shows, everyone wakes up in their own homes, drives to the track, races, and drives home and sleeps in their own bed. And so you prevent people from having to stay in hotels, and you prevent a lot of other risks from happening. So this is definitely more secure than just anywhere else on like a normal NASCAR race weekend, but it's still not 100%, which is why I say if something goes wrong, if someone shows up to the track with a temperature or tests positive for the virus, it'll be interesting to see how NASCAR responds. Now, I saw reports today that initially suggested NASCAR was going to announce the revised schedule publicly today for coming from main NASCAR, coming from the main source, but then that was later shot down. NASCAR, I'm not sure when they're going to publicly reveal or commit to the schedule. Remember, this is all still tentative. This is the schedule that they've sent to race teams right now, but it is still subject to change. Remember, they sent possible revised schedules to the teams a couple weeks ago, and they looked a little bit different than what we see here. So stuff can still change. We're still almost 3 weeks away from racing returning should this all hold true, but keep in mind this is tentative, but it sounds like NASCAR is closer and closer to locking in on specific dates. Now, so far we've only talked about the Cup Series. We haven't talked about trucks or Xfinity or ARCA, but earlier today Matt Weaver, reporter for AutoWeek, put this out. As you can see here, he still has the Cup Series starting at the same time, May 17th, then May 20th, May 23rd, Darlington, then Charlotte. But here he has the NASCAR Xfinity Series beginning May 19th, a Tuesday. Their first race will be at Darlington. Then he also has ARCA returning May 23rd at Charlotte, and in this reported schedule revision, the Truck Series will begin Tuesday, May 26th. Their first race back will be Charlotte. Now, I would still take that with a grain of salt. This is the first report I've seen of NASCAR giving Xfinity, Trucks, ARCA any sort of return date. NASCAR, of course, has not said anything themselves just yet, so I would take that with a grain of salt. The Cup Series dates sound a little bit more set in stone. I think NASCAR is committing to those should everything continue to go as planned. Could still change if things change, but Trucks, Xfinity, ARCA, this is the first reports I've seen from it, so it's unclear yet how locked and loaded they are for those dates for those series, but at least it's clear that Trucks and Xfinity and ARCA will not be too far behind the Cup Series whenever the Cup Series hopefully begins racing soon. Alright, that was a lot of information. I've kind of given you guys my thoughts on it a little bit as we've gone through, but in a nutshell, my reaction to all of these reports that have just kind of come flying out of the woodworks here today, it's pretty simple. Obviously, it's a lot of racing in a short period of time. Not having practice sessions, not having qualifying sessions is going to be interesting to see how the rules interpret that. My initial thoughts, of course, are looking at the health and safety of this entire situation. Obviously, NASCAR doesn't want to put its crew guys, its drivers, its officials, anyone in the way of unnecessary risk. And it sounds like NASCAR has been able to come up with some form of a plan that will make the racetracks a bit more secure than usual, and at least to the point where it feels like most teams are now comfortable going back out there and participating. But I'm always thinking about worst case scenario, and I just worry what happens if for that first race back someone shows up to the track and tests positive for the virus. What happens? Do you just send that crew guy home? Do you just send that entire team home? How does that affect the points? There's Still a lot of questions that NASCAR has not answered yet, and it sounds like NASCAR is probably going to have to answer in the moment should they come up. And that's the stuff that concerns me a little bit, because there's still plenty of uncertainties. We all want to see NASCAR back on track as soon as possible. We want to see the whole world back on track as soon as possible. But there are a lot of things that have to happen, a lot of people that have to have their confidence reinvigorated for that to be possible. And I'm confident that NASCAR is confident they have a system in place that they think is as secure as it gets. But I'm not sure if that's actually true. You can't, nothing's 100% foolproof, let's be honest. But what I've been saying this entire time, and what is 100% clear, and it's being made clear by a lot of these decisions NASCAR and the racetracks are making, is that financially speaking, it's most important that NASCAR runs these races at real racetracks and gets them on TV. A lot of the sponsorship dollars that the teams get from sponsors are reliant on these races being shown on Fox and FS1 and NBC. The money that the racetracks get, and remember, racetracks, obviously not having fans in attendance will hit their bottom line quite a bit, but the majority of these racetracks still get most of their revenue from the TV deal. If they get their race shown on Fox, they're still going to make a pretty good amount of money. They're going to make most of their money that they would have normally made in that weekend just from having the race shown on TV. Doesn't matter if nobody's in attendance. Some teams are faring better than others. I'm mostly concerned about a lot of Xfinity and Truck Series teams, especially smaller teams. Many of those teams, it's been reported, have had to lay off some, if not all of their workforce, and that's really tough and really unfortunate for those crew members. So for their sake, I'd love to see NASCAR get back racing as soon as possible, because the moment race cars are on the racetrack, money starts coming in. And if money's coming in, people get paid, people get jobs back, people can continue to do what they love and support themselves and support their families. And so that's extremely important to me, but of course health and safety always at the forefront of everyone's memory or minds at the moment. But focusing on the financials, it's all about running these races on TV. It doesn't matter if nobody's there in attendance, most of the money comes from TV, and so that's most important at this point. It's not optimal, it's not perfect, but that is the best you can do in this imperfect scenario. What are the odds NASCAR returns May 17th? I would say fairly likely. I think South Carolina, which is where the first race, the state that the first race back would be in, has already lifted a lot of their restrictions earlier than many other states have. So I think that I don't foresee any circumstance where suddenly they shut things down and throw NASCAR out all of a sudden. I don't see that happening in the next couple of weeks. I think NASCAR will get the green light to race at Darlington. So I think that race will happen. Every other race, it's almost, you got to take it at a week-by-week basis. It's difficult to say what the best decision is here, but all I know is that I'm excited to hopefully see real race cars on the racetrack within the next couple of weeks, and it sounds like that is extremely likely. It sounds like that is now the plan. Hasn't been confirmed by NASCAR itself yet, but that sounds like that is the hope, and that is currently the plan. But things, as we've seen over these last couple months, can change extremely quickly and can take turns that we never saw coming. So everyone keep an open mind, because anything can change at a moment's notice. So we'll be here to talk about it if it does, but for the meantime, that's all I got for this video. A lot of information, a lot of speculation, but a lot of optimism as well, I think, in today's show, so that's always fun. But thank you all a ton for watching. Subscribe if you are new. Follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram, and of course, as always, a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. Couldn't do the show without the support I get from every single one of you there on Patreon. I really appreciate your support, especially during these uncertain up and down times, but thank you a ton for supporting Out of the Groove, supporting the show. Remember, we got the Pickup Throwdown tomorrow. Have a special episode hopefully planned later in the week. I think all you Patreon supporters will be very excited about what's to come on this channel, and I couldn't do it without your support. Thank you all for watching. That is all I've got. I will see you again very, very soon. Stay safe out there, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.